Hello friends. Today we're going to talk about the Quiet Revolution, a period of time in the 1960s when Quebec, Canada's French-speaking province, modernized and started to push for independence from Canada. So, in the 1960s, Quebec nationalism was on the rise. There were large-scale migrations of French Canadians from the province of Quebec to the neighboring province of Ontario. This caused an identity crisis in Quebec. French Canadians were leaving their province. What would become of French culture in Quebec? How could they preserve it? That's when Quebecois began to look at the example of Algeria, which had recently gained independence from the Dutch. It was closer to home than any other example, so the idea of independence began to take hold. But there was another problem. The Catholic Church had a lot of power in Quebec. In fact, it was the largest landowner in the province. The church ran most of the schools and hospitals and had a lot of control over how the province was run. But as is often the case in history, modernization and technology made the church's position less and less tenable. As Quebec modernized, it became more secular. Fewer and fewer people went to church. Fewer and fewer people believed in the teachings of the Catholic Church. And this had an effect on the clergy's power. They lost it. And so the Quiet Revolution began. The people of Quebec began to demand more and more power for themselves and away from the clergy. By the late 1960s, the people of Quebec were demanding independence from Canada altogether. They wanted to create a separate state where French was the official language, and the Catholic Church had no power. Now, it's important to note that this was not a violent revolution. It was called the Quiet Revolution because the people of Quebec were very orderly and peaceful in their protests. They knew that violence would only turn the Canadian government against them and their cause, so they remained peaceful. In 1970, the FLQ, or the Front de Libération de Québec, kidnapped two people, a British diplomat and a businessman. They demanded that the Canadian government recognize Quebec as an independent country. When the Canadian government refused, the FLQ executed the British diplomat. This was the only violent act of the entire Quiet Revolution. It didn't have any lasting impact, and the revolution remained largely peaceful. By the 1980s, the revolution was over. Quebec had become a modern, secular province. Canada, in World War I and II, Canada's contribution to World War I is most evident at Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele. Over 60,000 Canadians fought in this war. And at its peak, there were 200,000 Canadians fighting overseas. At Vimy Ridge in France, a Canadian corps is made up of 4 divisions, roughly 100,000 soldiers, took part in one of the largest and bloodiest battles of the war. The goal was to capture a ridge that had been in enemy hands since the beginning of the war. After a week of heavy fighting, the Canadians succeeded in taking the ridge, inflicting more than 3,500 casualties on the Germans and capturing 2,000 prisoners. This victory was a turning point in the war, and it established Canada's reputation as a nation of soldiers. But the fighting wasn't over yet. Canadians went on to liberate much of Belgium and France, including the city of Passchendaele, which is now a world-renowned memorial site. In total, more than 66,000 Canadians died in World War I, a sacrifice that helped to create the Canada we know today. It's no surprise then that the first shots fired by Canada's 1st Battalion in World War II were in defense of Poland. Within 2 years, 75,000 Canadians had joined the fight against fascism. By 1944, the war in Europe was at a stalemate. The Allies needed a new plan to defeat the Germans. And in June, the Allied forces launched the D-Day invasion of Normandy. Among them were 14,000 Canadians who took part in the battle. They fought bravely, helping to secure the beaches and allowing the Allies to establish a foothold in Europe. This was a pivotal moment in the war, and the Canadian contribution was vital to its success. From there, Canadian troops went on to liberate much of the Netherlands, fighting their way through some of the fiercest German defenses. By the end of the war, 42,000 Canadians had been taken prisoner by the Germans, while 28,000 had lost their lives in the war. 75 years ago, in 1867, the Dominion of Canada was formed. But why did these formerly separate colonies unite as one country? And what were the first 4 provinces? Let's find out. The first 4 provinces to join the Canadian Confederation were Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. The British had initially planned to keep the colonies separate, but as the United States began to grow, They realized that if they didn't unite the colonies, some of them might end up like this, annexed by the Americans. So in 1867, the British North America Act was passed, uniting these 4 colonies into one country called Canada. But why these 4 and not others? Well, for starters, all 4 were located in the region known as Atlantic Canada, which at the time was under the control of the British. Also, they were close enough together that it made sense to unite them, but far enough away from the growing American threat. This would prove to be very important as the newly formed country of Canada expanded westward. But who was the first Prime Minister of this new country? Well, that would be Sir John A. Macdonald, who served from 1867 to 1873, and again from 1878 to 1891. He is considered the founding father of Canada and the leader of the Wahoo Conservative Party. But wait, there's more. When Canada was first created, it only included the provinces of Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. The other 6 provinces and 3 territories that make up Canada today were not added until much later. In fact, the westernmost province of British Columbia wasn't even added until 1871, just 4 years after Confederation. Did you know that a railway 6,000 miles across Canada was built in just 7 years? Back in the 1800s, there were 2 separate colonies on the east and west coasts of Canada, separated by a whole lot of nothing. And while they were connected by a vast network of lakes and rivers, there was no practical way to move goods or people between them. That is, until someone got the idea of building a railway. On one side, you had the bustling metropolis of Montreal, with a population of over 250,000 people. And on the other side, you had Vancouver, a small village of about 6,000 people. The plan was to connect the 2 cities with a railway that would stretch over 6,000 miles across Canada, through some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth, including the towering Rocky Mountains. Construction began in 1881, with the first workers being 250. Chinese immigrants who had come to Canada seeking better lives for themselves and their families. They worked for next to nothing in harsh conditions, laying the tracks by hand with pickaxes and shovels. The Chinese workers were paid about $1 a day, while their white counterparts were paid 3 times that amount. Despite the dangerous working conditions and the low pay, the Chinese workers were crucial to the project, and their contribution should not be forgotten. As the railway grew, so did the country. The completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway united a nation and spurred economic growth, provided jobs for thousands of people, and connected the country from coast to coast, making it easier for people and goods to move around. Without the railway, Canada might have remained a collection of small, isolated settlements. But thanks to the hard work of the Chinese immigrants and others who came after them, Canada was able to grow into the prosperous country we know today. In fact, the completion of the railway led to a population boom. Between 1881 and 1911, the number of people living in Canada more than doubled. The country went from having a population of about 3 million people to over 7 million. This was largely due to immigration. The railway made it possible for people to move to Canada from other countries. The French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War, was a global war that started in 1756 and ended in 1763. But what was it about? Well, it was basically France and Britain fighting over who would control North America. And the war would be a decisive victory for the British. But before we get into that, if you like fun history facts, then stay tuned for more content. So the war in North America was fought between the French, who had control of Canada, and the British, who had control of the 13 colonies. The fighting began in 1754 and ended with the Battle of the Plains of Abraham in 1759. This battle took place near Quebec City, and it was fought between the British and French forces. The British were led by General James Wolfe, and the French by the Marquis de Montcalm. The battle was a tactical victory for the British, but both leaders would end up being killed. After this victory, the British would go on to capture Montreal, and the entire region of New France would fall to the British by the end of the year. The reason for this was a number of factors. One was that the British had a much larger population and a stronger economy. They also had more experience fighting wars, not to mention they had the support of their powerful navy. The French, on the other hand, were a much smaller country with a weaker economy. They also didn't have the same level of military experience as the British. Despite this, the French had the advantage of fighting on their home turf, so to speak. They also had the support of the local Native American tribes who were allied with them. In the end, though, it wasn't enough for the French to hold on to Canada. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and it would officially end the war. The treaty was actually between Britain, France, Spain, and Portugal. It was a bit of a messy situation. But anyway, the treaty gave Britain control of all of New France. They had defeated the French and were now the dominant power in North America. This would have a profound impact on the course of history. It set the stage for the American Revolution and the Louisiana Purchase. For the war between Britain and the United States over control of North America, okay, it's time to meet the Europeans. During the Age of Exploration, Europeans began exploring and conquering the world. The first place they settled was right here in Newfoundland. In 1080, Vikings from Norway established a settlement called L'Anse aux Meadows. It was the first permanent settlement of Europeans in North America, but it only lasted about 50 years. Then 5 centuries later, in the 1500s, French explorer Jacques Cartier set out to find a northwest passage to Asia. He explored and mapped much of Canada and claimed it for France. But the French didn't actually settle here. It just kept sailing further and further west. Meanwhile, British explorers were racing to the New World. They wanted to claim land for themselves and for their king, and they were willing to fight the French to do it. The 2 explorers racing to get west were Sir Francis Drake and Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Gilbert actually landed first, but his ships were lost in a storm, and he never made it off the island. So Drake took over and became the first English explorer to circumnavigate the globe. He also claimed this land for England. The English began to settle here in the 1580s, but then the French came back and started fighting the English for control of this land. And so began the first fur trade in North America. Europeans wanted beaver pelts to make their hats, and the colonists needed the furs to make money. This was the start of an epic struggle between the French and the British that would last for more than 100 years. Before European colonization, the Indigenous peoples of Canada lived a life of freedom and self-sufficiency. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples had a deep connection to their land, to each other, and to the animals they hunted and the fish they caught. Their way of life was shaped by the natural world around them, and they had a profound respect for the environment. The various First Nations across Canada had their own unique cultures, traditions, and social systems. Some were organized into large, complex societies with hereditary chiefs and a strong sense of community. Others were more loosely structured with smaller, more nomadic groups. Despite their differences, all of these societies were united by their deep connection to the land. Life for the First Nations people was not easy. They faced many challenges, including harsh weather conditions and the threat of war with neighboring tribes. But they were resilient and resourceful people who adapted to their environment and developed new technologies to help them survive. One of the ways they adapted to their environment was through hunting and fishing. The Indigenous peoples of Canada hunted a variety of animals, including deer, moose, bear, and buffalo. They also fished for salmon, trout, and other freshwater fish. Hunting and fishing were not just a means of obtaining food, but were also an integral part of their culture and spirituality. The animals they hunted were often seen as sacred, and they performed rituals to honor the animals and to ensure that they would be respected and used properly. Another important aspect of life for the First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples, was their connection to the land. They did not see themselves as separate from nature, but as part of it. They knew that they could not survive without the resources that the land provided, and they felt a responsibility to protect and preserve it for future generations. Before the arrival of Europeans, the Indigenous peoples of Canada had already developed extensive trade networks. They traded with other First Nations peoples across the continent, as well as with the Inuit and Métis. They traded a variety of goods, including furs, food, and tools. These trade networks were vital to their survival, as they allowed them to obtain the goods they needed to survive in their environment. In conclusion, before colonization, the Indigenous peoples of Canada lived a life of freedom and self-sufficiency. They had a deep connection to their land, to each other, and to the animals they hunted and the fish they caught. Thousands of years before Europeans showed up, the land we now call Canada was inhabited by many different Indigenous tribes and cultures. including the Inuit, the Huron, the Iroquois, and the Chinook, just to name a few. These nations had their own distinct languages, cultures, and ways of life, but they all shared a deep connection to the land and each other. They traded with one another, intermingled through marriage, and most importantly, resisted the encroachment of European powers for as long as they could. But resist they did in the early 1600s. French explorer Samuel de Champlain claimed the region for France and established a few small settlements. However, the vast majority of Canadians today can trace their roots back to the British, who began exploring and colonizing the area in the late 1700s. The British were initially drawn to Canada because of its abundant natural resources, especially furs. The fur trade was a major driver of the early economy and had a profound impact on the relationship between the colonists and the indigenous peoples. As the colonies grew, so did tensions with the French, who still held on to parts of Canada. Eventually, these tensions boiled over into a series of conflicts known as the 7 Years' War, or as the North Americans called it, the French and Indian War. The war was part of a larger global struggle between Britain and France for dominance, and it was fought not only in Europe, but also in North America. The British, with the help of their indigenous allies, defeated the French and captured Montreal in 1760. This victory led to the Treaty of Paris in 1763, which officially ended the war and gave Britain control of Canada. Following this, Britain adopted a policy of systematic colonization in Canada. They divided the colonies into Upper and Lower Canada, with the former being mostly settled by English-speaking Protestants, and the latter by French-speaking Catholics. Despite these differences, the two colonies came together in 1867 to form the Dominion of Canada, self-governing nation within the British Empire. This act of confederation is still celebrated today as Canadian Thanksgiving. But wait a minute, isn't Canada part of the United States? Well, no, it's not. And that's because of a guy named Sir John A. Macdonald, who was the first Prime Minister of Canada. He wanted to expand Canadian territory to include the Pacific coast. This would not only give Canada access to the Pacific, but also serve as a buffer between the rapidly growing United States and the heartland of British North America. Thanks to his efforts in the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway, Canada became a transcontinental country in 1885. Throughout the 19th century, Canada continued to grow and develop. It became a major agricultural producer, thanks to its vast amount of arable land. And it also developed a strong manufacturing and industrial base. By the early 20th century, Canada was well on its way to becoming a modern, industrialized nation. Then came the two world wars. Canada's entry into these conflicts was initially met with mixed feelings. Many Canadians felt a strong sense of duty to defend their adopted homeland, and saw the wars as an opportunity to prove their loyalty to the crown. However, others, particularly those with Irish and Ukrainian ancestry, felt a greater sense of loyalty to their cultural heritage than to the British Empire. During World War I, this tension led to the formation of the Ukrainian and Polish nationalists, which aimed to prevent conscription of their members into the war effort. But ultimately, thousands of Canadians from various ethnic backgrounds fought and died in both world wars, helping to secure victories for the Allied forces. In the aftermath of World War II, Canada emerged as a significant player on the world stage, was one of the founding members of the United Nations, and played an active role in the organization's early years. Canada also began to assert its independence from Britain in the post-war era, although it did not formally sever its ties with the mother country until 1982, when the Canada Act was passed. There's a lot of talk about Indigenous rights these days, but what do Indigenous people need to know about what those rights are? Well, one thing is the right not to be taken from your family and community by force, and to be allowed to keep your language, culture, and identity. But that right was taken away from Indigenous peoples in Canada, the US, and Australia through a system of residential schools. It was a system that operated for more than a century. The last school closed its doors in 1996, and the goal of the system was to assimilate Indigenous children into white society by taking them from their families and communities and placing them in boarding schools run by the government or by churches. They were not allowed to speak their languages. They were not allowed to practice their religions. They were not allowed to have any contact with their families. The children were punished if they spoke their language, or if they acted in any way that was contrary to the values and beliefs of the dominant culture. And so over the course of many generations, the system succeeded in taking away the languages, cultures, and identities of hundreds of thousands of Indigenous children. But in recent decades, there has been a movement towards truth and reconciliation. In Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established in 2008 to document the history and the legacy of the residential school system. In 2015, the Canadian government formally apologized for its role in the system and committed to a process of reconciliation. Similar processes have been underway in the United States and Australia. And the work of truth and reconciliation is important because it's about more than just acknowledging what happened in the past. It's about creating a better future. A future where Indigenous people are free to determine their own destinies, where they can speak their languages, practice their religions, and pass on their cultures to future generations. A future where all people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, can live together in a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. But the road to reconciliation is not an easy one. There are still many people who do not want to acknowledge the truth of what happened in the residential schools. And there is still a lot of work to be done to dismantle the structures of racism and discrimination that were put in place during the era of colonialism. But the work is worth it because it is essential to the creation of a more just and equitable world. Today, Indigenous activists around the world are working to protect their languages, cultures, and identities. They are working to ensure that the horrors of the residential school system never repeat themselves. And they are working to create a better future for generations to come. We should all be supporting their work, because it is essential to the creation of a more just and equitable world. In the 1700s and 1800s, the fur trade played a huge role in the development of Canada's economy, and no company was more involved in it than the Hudson's Bay Company. But how did the fur trade start? Who were the main players? And what impact did it have on Canada? One of the most important things to know about the fur trade is that it was a partnership between European companies and Indigenous peoples. They had a deep knowledge of the land and the animals that lived there, as well as the skills to hunt them. The Europeans, on the other hand, had the technology and resources to turn the furs into finished products that could be sold in the international market. When they partnered together, they created a powerful economic engine that would drive the development of Canada for centuries to come. There were two main groups of European traders, the French and the British. The French traders were mostly based in the area around Montreal and Quebec. While the British traders were based in the area around Hudson Bay, these two groups would eventually form two rival companies, the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company. These two companies would compete fiercely against each other to control the fur trade. The Northwest Company was a more democratic organization with a more diverse workforce. In contrast, the Hudson's Bay Company was a more hierarchical organization with a smaller workforce. This competition led to an increase in the number of trading posts and settlements along the way. By the end of the 1700s, fur traders had established a network of trading posts across Canada, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. This vast network of trading posts allowed the traders to collect furs from a wide variety of Indigenous peoples, each of whom had their own unique culture and way of life. Some of the most important trading partners of the fur traders were the Cree, the Ojibwe, and the Assiniboine peoples. The Cree were a large and powerful group who lived in what is today Ontario and Quebec. The Ojibwe were a smaller but very influential group who lived in the area around Lake Superior. The Assiniboine were a nomadic group who lived in the area around the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. Despite the fierce competition between the two companies, both the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company played a major role in the development of Canada. They helped to open up the interior of the continent to European settlement, and they created a large network of trading posts and settlements that would later become the backbone of Canada's infrastructure. Though the competition between the two companies would eventually lead to the War of 1812 between Britain and the United States, as well as the eventual establishment of Canada as a British colony, let's talk about modern Canada, shall we? How did this country go from being mostly white to being the most racially diverse country in the world? That's what we're going to find out today. After World War II, there was a huge immigration boom, Many people from Asia and the Middle East came to Canada seeking refuge. At this time, Canada had a population of about 11 million people. By the year 2000, that number had increased to over 30 million people. And by 2021, Canada had reached a population of over 38 million people. It's a big increase in just a few decades. So why are so many people moving to Canada? Well, it's because of its welcoming and inclusive policies. In 1971, Canada officially adopted the policy of multiculturalism, which promotes the preservation of different cultural and racial groups within society. This policy has been a major factor in attracting immigrants from all over the world. Canada is now home to a wide variety of cultures, including Chinese, Indian, Korean, Japanese, Filipino, Pakistani, Iranian, Arab, Hispanic, and many more. This diversity has enriched the country in many ways. For example, Canada's food scene has been greatly influenced by the various ethnic communities. From Chinese restaurants to Indian curries to Korean barbecue, there is a wide range of delicious cuisine to choose from. Furthermore, Canada's cultural festivals and events celebrate the country's diversity and promote cultural exchange. The Toronto Caribbean Carnival, the Montreal Jazz Festival, and the Vancouver Chinese New Year celebration are just a few examples of the many festivals that take place across Canada. These festivals not only showcase the country's diversity, but also promote cultural exchange and understanding. Moreover, Canada's multiculturalism has made it a more tolerant and open-minded society. By embracing diversity, Canadians have learned to appreciate different cultures and perspectives. This has created a more inclusive and welcoming society for everyone. So you're probably thinking, okay, this is great for Canada, but what does this mean for the rest of the world? Well, Canada's multiculturalism has made it a leader on the global stage. The country has been praised for its commitment to diversity and inclusion. Moreover, Canada's diverse population has given the country a unique perspective on international issues. This has made Canada a valuable partner for countries around the world. In conclusion, Canada's immigration boom and multiculturalism have been major factors in shaping the country's population and its role on the global stage. From the influx of new Canadians from Asia and the Middle East after World War II to the official adoption of multiculturalism in 1971, Canada has embraced diversity and inclusion as core values. This has resulted in a more tolerant and open-minded society, as well as a richer cultural landscape. Furthermore, Canada's multiculturalism has made it a leader on the global stage, known for its commitment to diversity and its ability to bring people together. Canada's vast natural resource wealth has played a pivotal role in its economic growth and international standing. From abundant mineral deposits to extensive forests and fertile agricultural lands, Canada's resource-rich geography has shaped its industrial landscape, driving key sectors such as mining, forestry, and agriculture. Let's start with oil sands in Alberta, specifically Athabasca, which holds the second-largest oil reserve globally right after Venezuela. It's estimated to contain over 1.7 trillion barrels of oil. Alberta is also rich in minerals like gold, nickel, uranium, and potash. These resources contribute significantly to the provincial GDP and Canada's export earnings. For example, in 2021, Canada exported over $15 billion worth of potash, making it the world's largest exporter of this nutrient-rich ingredient. Canada's mineral wealth extends beyond Alberta. Ontario, for instance, is renowned for its gold mining heritage, and Sudbury is its largest producer. British Columbia's coastal regions are celebrated for their exceptional quality of lumber. The Canadian Shield, a massive rock formation covering much of the country, is a treasure trove of minerals like gold, zinc, copper, nickel, diamonds, and even uranium. This mineral wealth has made Canada one of the top mining countries globally, playing a vital role in meeting the demands of various industries worldwide. Canada's forestry sector, concentrated in provinces like Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, is another significant contributor to its GDP. The vast boreal forests, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, provide ample resources for the forestry industry. Canada is among the top exporters of lumber and wood products globally, with its high-quality timber finding applications in construction and manufacturing industries worldwide. Similarly, Canada's abundant lakes and rivers, along with its dedication to sustainable fishing practices, have made it a notable player in the global fisheries market. Species like Atlantic salmon, Pacific salmon, cod, and trout are among the most sought-after catches, contributing significantly to the Canadian economy and providing essential protein sources worldwide. The Canadian prairies, particularly Saskatchewan and Alberta, are celebrated as the breadbasket of the world, producing a staggering 80% of the world's flaxseed and an impressive amount of wheat and grain. These agricultural products not only feed Canadians, but also play a crucial role in global food security. In recent years, Canada's renewable energy sector has witnessed remarkable growth, driven by the need for clean and sustainable energy sources. Hydropower, wind, and solar energy are leading the way, with Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia at the forefront. Canada's abundant water resources and commitment to environmental responsibility have positioned it as a major producer of clean energy, meeting both domestic needs and contributing to international markets. Canada's natural resource wealth extends to its dairy and meat industries, which are among the largest in the world. Ontario and Quebec lead in dairy production, while Alberta and Saskatchewan are prominent in beef and pork production. Canada's agricultural sector is a powerhouse, producing a variety of crops and livestock products that contribute significantly to the economy and provide essential goods for both domestic consumption and international markets. Another notable aspect of Canada's agriculture is its export of canola. Canada is the world's largest exporter of canola. With its high-quality oilseed finding applications in cooking, biofuel, and animal feed. Similarly, Canada's maple syrup industry, concentrated in Quebec, is world-renowned, with the province producing approximately 75% of the world's maple syrup. And let's not forget about Canada's thriving seafood industry. With extensive coastlines on both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, Canada is a major producer and exporter of various seafood products. Species like Atlantic salmon, Pacific salmon, cod, and trout are among the most sought-after catches, contributing significantly to the Canadian economy and providing essential protein sources worldwide. Canada has also strategically positioned itself as a global leader in the automotive industry. Ontario, in particular, has emerged as a major hub, housing significant operations of automakers like General Motors, Ford, Toyota, Honda, and Nissan. The skilled workforce and advanced manufacturing capabilities in the province have contributed to Canada's reputation as a key player in the automotive sector. Similarly, Canada has made inroads in the aerospace industry. Companies like Bombardier in Quebec are at the forefront of aircraft manufacturing and have a strong presence in the global aerospace market. Canada's skilled labor force and advanced technological capabilities have positioned the country as a competitive player in this sector. Additionally, other industries such as steel production, chemical manufacturing, and machinery contribute significantly to Canada's industrial output and export earnings. Steel produced in places like Hamilton, Ontario is renowned for its quality, while chemical manufacturing centers like Sarnia, Ontario, are key players in the industry. Machinery manufacturing, particularly in regions like Toronto and Montreal, produces high-quality equipment used in various sectors. Canada's food processing industries are also a vital part of its economy. With a strong agricultural base, Canada processes a wide range of food products, including meat, poultry, fish, dairy, and grains. Cities like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver have significant food processing facilities that not only supply domestic markets, but also export processed foods internationally. It should be noted that Canada shares a strong trade relationship with the United States, its largest trading partner. The two countries are part of the USMCA agreement, which promotes trade between North America's three largest economies. Trade between Canada and the U.S. is facilitated by the Canada-U.S. border, which is the longest undefended border in the world. Canada's vast natural resource wealth and diversified industrial base have enabled it to become a major exporter of various goods and services. Its exports include oil, lumber, cars, machinery, chemicals, food products, and more. On the other hand, Canada's imports primarily consist of electronics, machinery, consumer goods, and various raw materials. As a member of the G7, Canada plays a significant role in the global market, and its resource-rich economy contributes substantially to international trade. Furthermore, Canada's strategic partnerships and trade agreements help promote economic growth and provide access to new markets. One of the key factors driving Canada's economic growth is its skilled immigrant labor force. Canada actively recruits immigrants with specialized skills to contribute to its thriving industries. This influx of talent has helped fuel innovation and growth across various sectors, making Canada's economy more robust and diversified. In conclusion, Canada's economic strength is deeply rooted in its abundant natural resources, strong industries, and skilled workforce. From its vast mineral deposits to thriving agricultural and manufacturing sectors, Canada has leveraged its resource wealth to establish itself as a major player in the global economy. As Canada continues to invest in innovation, infrastructure, and its people, it is poised to maintain its economic strength and prosperity on the global stage. What are your thoughts on today's video? We would love to hear from you in the comments below. Please feel free to share your thoughts, insights, or any suggestions you may have for future videos. Your feedback is highly valued and helps us create more engaging content for you. So if you found this video informative or helpful, please don't forget to hit the like button and share it with your friends. Your support means a lot to us and motivates us to keep bringing you quality content on economy, business, and finance. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video.